Thank you very much, Chairman Landrieu and Ranking Member Murkowski, for holding this important hearing on how our nation budgets for seasonal wildfires. I appreciate you providing me with the opportunity to speak about a measure that I co-sponsored with Senators Ron Wyden and Jim Risch, along with a number of other bipartisan members of the Senate. S. 1875, the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, would fix a fundamental flaw in how our country funds wildfire suppression. By way of context, it's important to note that the National Interagency Fire Center reported that last year there were more than 47,000 wildland fires nationwide that burned 4.3 million acres. More than 722,000 of those acres burned in my home state of Idaho alone. And I just reviewed the statistics for this year. The wildfire season is already well underway in Idaho, as I'm sure it is in a number of other places in the country. As more resources go toward fire suppression, resources that could be used to implement projects that improve forest health, benefit forest communities, and enhance public safety are squeezed. In fact, in 8 of the past 10 years, federal agencies' fire suppression efforts have been under-budgeted, which has led to resources being taken from important projects to cover the federal government's response to the wildland fires. For example, in fiscal year 2013, federal agencies borrowed more than $600 million from other accounts to cover the costs of fire suppression. Such fire borrowing is disruptive to important forest management missions, including activities such as thinning that would both reduce the occurrence and the severity of the fires and drive down suppression costs. In one of the many disruptions in Idaho, fire borrowing has meant that the Forest Service was unable to meet noxious weed commitments and reduce hazardous fuels, while wildlife habitat treatment projects went unfinished. In Louisiana, Chairman Landrieu, I understand you've already made this point, a 1,200-acre timber sale on the Kisatchie National Forest that was intended for critical habitat for the red-cockaded woodpecker was disrupted. And Ranking Member Murkowski, timber projects and sale activities have been disrupted in Alaska, as you know, in each of the past 2 years at least, because of the fire borrowing. These events have serious economic consequences for the men and women who work in the logging industry and the many mills that depend on the timber they produce. What's worse is that Congress must restore this funding through off-budget emergency spending, which is ineffective and bad budget policy. The Wildfire Disaster Funding Act would give firefighters and land managers more tools for efficient and effective fire management and strengthen our fire prevention efforts. Our bill would better limit the reallocation of resources away from fire prevention and hazardous fuels reductions projects, which reduce the cycle of costly fires. It would also help cover the under-budgeted and growing cost of fire suppression. Importantly, our bill would improve the way wildfire suppression is funded without increasing federal funding. As the Congressional Budget Office analysis concluded, our bill would not score. It will not increase the deficit. The CBO explicitly states that S. 1875 would have no effect on the federal budget. This measure accomplishes this by enabling emergency fire events to be treated like other major natural disasters by supporting these emergency wildfires through existing disaster programs. Emergency fire events would be funded under disaster programs, and the routine wildland firefighting costs would be funded through the regular budgeting process. By allocating funding for wildfire suppression from within existing disaster funding limits, the legislation does not increase federal funding. Another fire season has already begun, and conditions are concerning. The National Interagency Fire Center reports that fuels and drought conditions across the West point to a condition that would support a greater than usual likelihood of significant fire. We must take steps now that will put us on improved footing to face current and future fires. We must now act to ensure that those protecting our communities have the resources necessary to decrease the threat of fires and to respond to wildland fires. Firefighters, land managers, and forest communities deserve assurance that steps will be taken to continually improve the federal response to wildfires. Our legislation would assist with that effort. Our bill enjoys wide support from both sides of the aisle in both chambers of Congress and from more than 230 timber, sportsman, and conservation groups. Again, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member, I appreciate the opportunity you've given me to speak to you today on this important and critical issue, and appreciate your attention to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.